Welcome to episode number 57 of the Road to Cinema podcast, featuring the Oscar-winning editor of Whiplash, Tom Cross, as well as one of the editors of the new David O. Russell film Joy, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Robert De Niro, as well as Bradley Cooper, which opens in theaters on Christmas Day. We'll discuss Tom's collaboration with director David O. Russell, as well as fellow editors on Joy, Jay Cassidy and Alan Baumgarten. Also, Tom's process for editing Whiplash, directed by Damien Chazelle and starring Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons, and the film which won Tom Cross at Best Editing Oscar at last year's Academy Awards. We'll have great insights into Tom's editing process and collaboration with directors David O. Russell and Damien Chazelle. And we'll also learn about Damien Chazelle's new film, which is also being edited by Tom Cross, La La Land, which stars Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. For more information on the Road to Cinema podcast, to read the Road to Cinema blog, and to watch our Road to Cinema YouTube series, please visit jogroadproductions.com. And don't forget, you still have a chance to win a free download of the Final Draft screenwriting software by doing all of the above. Follow us on Twitter at JogRoad, like us on Facebook, JogRoad Productions, subscribe to our YouTube channel, JogRoad Productions. Write us a nice review on the iTunes podcast page for the Road to Cinema podcast. And follow us on Instagram at Jog Road Productions. Do all of the above, and you'll have a chance to win a free download of the Final Draft screenwriting software brought to you by Road to Cinema and our friends at Final Draft. And now we join the Oscar-winning editor of Whiplash, Tom Cross, and his new film Joy, directed by David O. Russell and starring Jennifer Lawrence, Robert De Niro, and Bradley Cooper, opens in theaters on Christmas Day. Going back to the beginning of your career as an editor, is there anything that you learned that you think are sort of essential lessons that have stuck with you today when you're working on a feature film?
I started my career in commercials in New York City. I was an assistant editor at a commercial editing house, and because I worked in New York, I worked in a lot of different genres because I think when you're in New York, you kind of take what you can get. And so I worked in documentary, TV promos, industrials, reality TV, fashion videos, just about everything. And I think a lot of the lessons were kind of the same, regardless of the genre. Early on in working in commercials, I remember talking with an older editor, and I forget exactly his words, but he basically, he was a very well-liked person, and very easy to get along with, very, very kind of magnetic and very smart. And, he reminded me that a lot of what we do is put people at ease and be diplomatic and be generous and be giving and be supportive. And if you do a lot of that stuff, you get it pays back, it pays dividends. And I think it may have been, I think when he said that, it may have been in the context of someone making a mistake or something like that, someone screwing up something and getting into trouble. And I think his he was looking at the situation from afar and basically saying, if people get to know you and they like you, at some point, you're gonna. No one's perfect. You're gonna make a mistake, but if they know you and they like you, they're gonna say, it's Steve. He's gonna fix it or something like that. And so what I remember early on from that was just that, a lot of what we do in the editing room is very, has to do with our people skills. It doesn't just have to do with film editing. And, when I went to film school and, started working on my own films and helping other students work on their films, it really wasn't about people skills. It was more about, learning a craft and really, kind of burying myself in that. And so that was a real eye-opener. And I have to say, working through getting into the television world and moving into features, assisting and additional editing, and now editing, so much of the job is about diplomacy, and it's about how you carry yourself and how you support your filmmakers. That counts for so much. So I think if there was one big thing that I remember from the beginning that's kind of threaded through everything I've done, it's that thought.
Yeah, is it important also to learn sort of the collaboration process between yourself and a director, yourself even with producers?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And again, all the lessons I learned working in commercials and working with editors and working with agency people, clients, creative producers, I learned that you really want to create a place in your editing room where everyone feels like their ideas are important, and then there's a certain level of trust, and it's again, I think it doesn't matter what the genre is. I think it's kind of the same all around, and definitely, I think, I've encountered a lot of editors who are brilliant editors and they're great storytellers, but in some cases, and they'll admit it, they don't like people. They like to be left alone to work in their editing rooms, and I think for some people that works really well, and for other people that doesn't work so well. So I have a feeling that when I was an assistant editor, there was still film, and so I do come from a film background, but I know even before me, and certainly in the studio days, directors often weren't in the editing room at all. So I think there were entire generations of film editors who may have been good with people and gregarious, but I think a lot of them were used to working, with almost complete autonomy. They would do their process, which would take a certain amount of time because it was on film, and that was expected. And then they would run the movie in the screening room and get notes from the director, get notes from the producer, and then kind of go back to the cutting room, and that would be kind of repeated. But it's very different from what we often have today.
Yeah, transitioning, you mentioned that you had worked on film. Transitioning from working on film to learning computer editing software, was there a big learning curve there? And for you, what do you think was sort of the biggest creative difference between working on film as opposed to working on a computer?
I started when I went to film school. It was 16 millimeter, and of course, when I was a kid, I used to shoot little Super 8 movies and stuff like that. It was kind of all I knew, and video editing existed, but it was really pretty limited, and at least in comparison to film editing, because film editing was non-linear, whereas video editing at the time was tape-based, so it was linear. So we had some video editing stuff when I went to film school, but very few people were interested in it. They really gravitated towards film, and so when I first got, when I was looking for a job, I was looking for a job right on the cusp of the big shift. So my first job in New York City was, as I mentioned, working for a commercial editing company, and that was all cutting on Avid. And I didn't have any knowledge of the Avid other than I knew that that's where things were headed, and I was just dying to get hired there because I knew this was the future. So so even though I learned film in college, I got this job at this commercial editing company, and they had 8 or 9 Avids, which at the time was very expensive, and no other places really had Avids, and they still had film too. They had film negative that that the assistant editors would still handle. So, it was a very interesting situation because, in the editing rooms, all the editors were cutting on Avid, and across the hallway in the assistant editors' rooms, we still had film benches, and we would handle the film negative, and we actually had cement splicers to splice the negative together. And so it was you really, like, literally across the hall you had these two different worlds, and for me, I guess I very quickly got into Avid editing, through my commercial job, and so the transition wasn't really hard for me, even though I started on film. It happened. The transition happened pretty early in my professional career, so I would say that I was very lucky in that way. I hadn't been doing film professionally for that long, so I wasn't really, I didn't have enough time to create a comfort zone that was going to be shattered by a new digital revolution. So I kind of jumped on board the Avid thing pretty quickly, and in fact, Avid and my commercial background is kind of what got me into features, because I ended up assisting editor Tim Squires on some commercials that he was editing in between Ang Lee features, and he basically was cutting these commercials, and he needed an experienced assistant editor who had a background in commercials, and through some professional connections, I got hooked up with him, and and it's really because of my commercial background and my skills with Avid and my knowledge of modern, commercial workflows that we kind of connected. And then he brought me on to his next film, which was a little indie movie, but that was my first union job. So all of that, and then on that film with Tim Squires, we had he was cutting on Avid, but we still had 35 millimeter work print, and we still sunk film daily. So I think he appreciated that I, as an assistant, had skills in both realms. And that was a time where a lot of assistant editors or editorial departments were kind of getting divided. There were some assistants who didn't have much of a film background at all, and they would just focus on Avid. And then you had the film assistants who knew film. And I was fortunate that I kind of knew both. And I think that helped, that certainly helped me get some early jobs and helped me get hooked up with Tim Squires, who is kind of an early inspiration.
Yeah, I was curious, today, do you use Avid for the most part when you're editing a feature film?
Today, I definitely use Avid. I've pretty much used Avid since I started as an assistant editor in the mid '90s. That's really my big background. So I'm kind of that is my comfort zone. For other people, in the old days, it was film. For other people, it's Final Cut. For other people, it's Avid, and for me, it's Avid. So that's what I learned on. I tried different systems along the way. There were other little systems that don't even exist anymore, I don't think. D-Vision, and I do remember cutting some small projects on Final Cut, which I liked, but it wasn't. I don't think I did enough professional work on it to really get comfortable with it. So, and then of course, every time I assisted on projects, TV or film, I think 99.9% of the time, the editors I was working with were cutting on Avid, and so, for whatever reason. So I kind of existed in an Avid-centric world, and I use Avid today.
I was curious, sort of delving into your process when you're in the early stages of talking with a director about a particular project. Do you read the script and give notes as far as sort of how you may see the film being executed, or anything editorially that you think might be simplified or sort of work better in the production process?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything kind of starts with the script, and I'm considering a job, I always want to read the script, and I always want to know who's going to be in it, and I always like to know who the director is and what their work is. And so, there has to be, for me, there has to be something exceptional about something in at least one of those areas. Maybe if the script has problems, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a complete disaster, because certainly scripts evolve, and if you have a brilliant filmmaker and you feel like you're in competent hands, that may be reason enough to do the project. It depends. Sometimes you'll have, if there's a great actor in it or something like that, like I remember like my first solo feature editing job, a film called The Space Between. I got sent a script, and I knew that it was going to star Melissa Leo, and that was a huge plus for me. I really was interested when I heard that Melissa Leo was going to be in the project, and then I read the script, and I thought it was a fantastic script, and then I really wanted to do the film. But so it really starts in those areas, and so in the case of Whiplash, I got sent the feature script for Whiplash, even though there was no money to do the feature. This producer, Cooper Samuelson, who I worked with in the past as an assistant editor, he was going to produce, and he was going to produce Whiplash as a short in order to try to get financing for the feature. But there already was a feature script, so he sent me the script, and I read it, and I thought it was amazing. I mean, I thought it was like the best script that I had ever read, and so I told him I would love to meet the director, and apparently, and I was told that the director was interested in meeting me because I had done some additional editing on 2 films for James Gray, Leon the Night and Two Lovers, and the director, Damien Chazelle, the writer-director of Whiplash, is a big James Gray fan, and so he was immediately intrigued and interested in meeting me. And so when I met him, I did what I usually do, which is I really try to tell the director, what I really loved about his approach, what I really loved about the script, and how I might approach it. But I'm honest with him, but I also want to leave room for what his or her vision is. So I do, come with ideas about how things might be shot or might be put together, but I really don't lay on too thick with that, because I really, because especially if I don't know the director, I really want to see what they're all about and what they want to do. So I do come armed with thoughts and ideas, but I also really try to be a good listener in these situations, in these meetings. So, when Damien spoke about how he wanted to approach the film and, what sort of style he wanted on it, we kind of immediately hit it off, because, he said that he wanted to do this music movie, but not have it feel like a music movie that people would expect. He didn't want it to just feel like a lighthearted movie about band camp. He said that he wanted the music scenes to feel hard and brutal. He wanted the rehearsing and the practicing to feel like an athlete training. He wanted to feel kind of the sweat and the blood on the drums. His big reference for Whiplash was Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull. So he said he wanted the editing style and to be like Thelma Schoonmaker's editing. He wanted the music scenes to feel like the boxing scenes from Raging Bull. So that meant brutal, ferocious, fast. So when he started talking about that, he really he spoke about specifics, and he spoke about, having, cuts at right angles, and, having a certain amount of velocity. And it was clear that he really loved editing in certain movies. And and so I was immediately thrilled by that, and you know, I really left that meeting feeling like, oh my God, this is like, I can't wait to work on this project with this director. You know, the script is amazing. It's got amazing people involved, J.K. Simmons, Johnny Simmons, and now he just told me his pitch for the style and the approach, and it's exactly what, you know, what I would hope to do. So in terms of, you know, that was kind of one of the most exciting meetings for a film that I've ever had, and you know, I'm so happy to say that when he shot the film, he even the short and the feature, he delivered on what he had intended to do. That is to say, he shot all the material that we would need to implement the style that he was pitching, and that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I say, I want to make this scene like, you know, like the opening of Saving Private Ryan, and then what they deliver you in film is not that, you know. So that was kind of the perfect meeting, and then the perfect execution after the meeting, in a way, by him.
Yeah, I was curious, when you received the footage to start editing, what was your impression of it? Because it's so visceral when you look at the shots in Whiplash. You know, you feel like you're in the room. You feel like you're really in the mind of Miles Teller.
Well, the footage was all pretty amazing, and it was kind of a miracle that they shot it in the amount of time they had. You know, it was like something like a 19-day shoot or something, and not only was he able to capture these amazing performances, which in my mind is the most important part of Whiplash, and that's why Whiplash works, performances by J.K. Simmons and Miles Teller, but he was also able to get all the kind of detail and all the window dressing and texture that makes Whiplash what it is. And that what I mean by that is he was able to get all this insert photography of drums and sweat and blood and all these wonderful, beautiful angles somehow in that schedule. So, you know, when I was seeing the dailies, some of the dailies were really visceral. You know, I mean, you have these kind of, you know, these macro shots, and all that stuff is very beautiful. But the performances and the scenes with the actors had a visceral, hard, brutal quality to them. You know, so even when they were even when the footage was not cut, the stuff felt very powerful, you know. I mean, you could really, in some cases, you could probably stand a take, and it would be pretty brutal. But you know, that was never the plan or never the design, you know, that Damien had in mind. But you know, it was kind of the dailies were kind of near perfect in some ways. You know, I mean, it wasn't. We really didn't have to. We helped the footage with the rhythm and the tempo of the editing, keeping it, you know, just fast enough that, you know, the audience had to just keep up with it, you know, or had a hard time to keep up with it a little bit. That was part of Damien's plan. It's part of his design. But the dailies were pretty amazing. So. I think the big challenge with Whiplash was really the schedule. Was really the race with the clock. You know, because we started shooting in early September, and you know, it was a very short shoot, which meant that you know, and I was on during the shoot. I was not on location, but I was editing and assembling the picture while he shot it. So he had a short shoot, which meant that I had very little time to put the whole movie together, because I like to have a whole cut of the movie done about a week after they wrap principal photography. But then we had to submit to Sundance for Sundance consideration in early November. So we had very little time to get that together. and and then we knew that if we got accepted in Sundance, we'd have to finish the film, color time, mix, everything would have to be done at a certain time in early December so that we could play Sundance in January. So that was the biggest challenge of Whiplash in a way. Damien was very well prepared going into the shoot. We were all very well prepared. I had, and my assistant editor as well, John Toe, we both had a certain amount of experience doing music movies. I had worked on the movie Crazy Heart with Jeff Bridges, and so we had worked, John Toe, my assistant, and I had worked on this movie Any Day Now, which had a lot of music scenes with Ellen Cumming. And so we both were pretty well versed in dealing with pre-recorded music and how to shoot it, how to organize it in the Avid. And so we were very well prepared. Damien had storyboarded the entire movie. He had drawn these sort of crude storyboards himself of every scene, and some of the music scenes, including the caravan finale at the end, he had actually drawn these little storyboards and then shot them with his phone and put them to music himself. And so we basically had animatics for a couple big music scenes, such as the end. And all of this stuff I used to help, it was there to help me assemble and put the movie together. And some of the stuff was very close to what he storyboarded. And then other stuff, the storyboards were a good starting point, or even the animatics were a good starting point, like at the end, for example. But then he and I had to really get in there and work closely together, and then it really took off emotionally, So, but it definitely helped that he had a very clear vision for the movie ahead of time, and and then he was very well prepared, so he knew what to shoot and how he wanted to put together. It never comes together identical to that stuff, because there's certain organic things when you shoot performances that happens, and so a big example of that is the scenes that comprise the short film of Whiplash. The short film was with J.K. Simmons and Johnny Simmons, and we worked on that together and got that to a certain place where we were very happy with it. And then flash forward a year later, we were doing feature, and Damien reshot those scenes. They're pretty close to what they were in the short, but he tried to shoot them the same way, and he wanted me to edit them the same way. So those scenes were scenes where he said, okay, well, here's your reference, just use the short. And so I used the short, and I cut those scenes together, and those scenes really didn't work at all. They just felt mechanical, and there was no tension, there was no suspense. The character Fletcher wasn't scary. The character of Andrew didn't seem like he was very frightened. And so those scenes, the rushing or dragging scene, and the scene before it where Fletcher kicks out a band member who plays a wrong note, those scenes I had to completely recut, and Damon and I had to work on that and figure out what worked best for those particular performances and that footage, because there's just something organic, again, when you shoot material, where you really have to custom cut it to that footage, and that should come as no surprise in a way, but we had worked and reworked the short film to a place where we really were happy with it, and figured, well, we've answered all the questions. Here are all the answers, but we were wrong. So, we really had to kind of pull out every trick in the book to make the scenes in the feature work. And it wasn't because the performances weren't good. The performances were great. Miles Teller was fantastic in that scene. J.K. Simmons is amazing in that scene. But they're just, it's different performances, it's different photography. Even when they tried to match the angles, it's just different. So that was a big lesson to both of us about, falling in love with the way something was cut before. It's almost like falling in love with temp music, But we rediscovered the scenes, and we took them apart and we completely rebuilt them, and finally we got them to a place where we felt like we had kind of exercised the ghost of the short.
Yeah, I was curious about editing to music, especially for the sequences in Whiplash. Did you begin editing them silently, or was the music or some sort of temp music always there while you were cutting them together?
In the case of most of the scenes in Whiplash, I definitely edited with music, and a lot of that is because of the way Damien shoots these scenes, and we're encountering that now with his new film La La Land, which has a lot of musical sequences. In the case of Whiplash, most of the big scenes, such as Caravan at the end, were shot to a pre-recorded music track. And what that means is that the music is created before shooting starts, and when they shoot the scene from all the different angles, they use the same track of music that they play back on loudspeakers, and sometimes they play them back into earwigs that the actors wear. But either way, the actors and musicians are playing on screen, on camera, to match the music that they are hearing. So in some cases they're pantomiming, in some cases they literally are playing, but they're just playing on top of this music that they're listening to. And that's the way music scenes have been done in Hollywood movies for years, ever since the beginning, probably the beginning of sound, when they first had started having scenes with musical numbers in them. So it gives you the most control, and it makes editing much easier in some ways. So the way Damien shoots these things, he really plans a lot of camera moves and certain things to happen at very specific moments in the song. So it really, it's very well planned out. So you really have to cut to the music. You have to cut with the music, because you hear a certain moment happen in the song, and then you have your footage, and you can see camera-wise what's supposed to happen at that very moment. Some things are fairly obvious, not everything, but there are a lot of things that are pre-planned like that. And the way my assistant editor organizes this stuff is really great, because it can be very overwhelming to have all this mountain of footage, and have to keep everything in sync. So the secret of doing that for us was really to know that you have a single pre-recorded track that is basically your common denominator, and almost all of your footage is subservient to that. All of the footage is shot to that same piece of music, so they all have something in common. And when they have something in common, it means that you can lock them or group them or sync them all together, and that's the goal. That's what you want to do. And so, you can't always do that, you can't always organize it and sync it all so that they're all in one group, but essentially you have them all locked together in some sort of form. And so what that means is, when you're editing in the timeline, you can basically, at the click of a button, you can see what other picture options you have. You can switch your cameras in the Avid timeline, and even though they might be different takes and different setups, they're all in sync to this same music track. So it's kind of a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful and overwhelming thing, because you can look in your timeline and say, oh, I see, I've got what would equal 20 cameras on this one part of the song, but it's all there and it's all in sync, and that's a huge help when you're trying to kind of wrangle a mountain full of footage for a music scene, and I'm not sure how you would do it otherwise, but when I'm looking at the footage for a music scene, I'm just looking at the dailies. I watch everything. You can get a lot of his intention just by looking at the dailies and taking note of certain camera moves and things like that. It becomes pretty obvious. When I look at some of Damien's footage, I say, oh, okay, this is what this shot, what this angle is for, is just for this one moment, this 2-second moment of the camera pushing in on the drums or pushing in on the hands. Okay, I see. And the rest of the shot is basically probably useless, And that's not to say he'll shoot the entire song and it's only good for that one little moment. Sometimes there are things like that, but often he'll just shoot pieces, and they're supposed to sync up to a certain moment in the song. But, working with Damien on Caravan, the finale of Whiplash, I followed all of his animatics and his storyboards and tried to fill in the blanks the best I could. And he and I started working on it together, and it really didn't have any shape at all. It was purely mechanical. And the big thing we discovered was that our scene was missing our characters. We had a lot of great camera moves. We had a lot of fast, quickly cut insert shots. It had a lot of muscle, and it was very bombastic, but it didn't really have any storytelling value. And so the thing we discovered was that we really needed to add more shots of J.K. Simmons, more shots of Miles Teller, and more shots of them looking at one another and relating to one another. And that's when that scene really began to work for us. That's when it really began to sing. Otherwise, it really didn't have any soul. And a big thing that Damien and I talked about was, because we're both kind of movie lovers, we love all sorts of movies, and sometimes we have similar tastes. But we talked about that famous scene from William Friedkin's The French Connection, car chase, which was edited by Jerry Greenberg, amazing, legendary film editor, and we discussed how how that scene worked, and what we came up with was that you had this amazing, ferocious, sort of violent scene, but that it was really made emotional by the performance of its lead actor Gene Hackman, and so that was kind of that scene from that movie was really kind of a case study of how to cut action, and the big lesson there is to always center the action around your characters. And so we thought about that movie, and we didn't intend to match that movie in cutting style or anything like that. It wasn't about that, but it reminded us that that our scene was probably going to get its power from the characters and their arcs during the scene, and also how the characters related to one another. So so what we found is when we showed one character starting at the scene from a certain place and getting to a different place by the end, that's when the scene really had a certain amount of power.
Yeah, in looking at Joy, which has some phenomenal performances in it, Robert De Niro, Jennifer Lawrence, of course, Virginia Madsen, and looking at it too compared to David O. Russell's other films, there seems to be more of sort of a playing around with structure and flashbacks and voiceover. So I was curious, approaching that film, if that evolved in the editing process, or was a lot of that in the script?
A little bit of both on David's movie. It's funny you mentioned about reading a script or how you prepare for what you look for when you take a job. I mean, I was contacted by producer John Davis about possibly working on Joy with David O. Russell, and once I got that email from John Davis, I was just I'm such a huge fan of David O. Russell's films. I was just chomping at the bit to do the movie. I mean, I was desperate to do the movie. That was like that email and subsequent phone calls were like a dream come true. So where I'm going with this is that I interviewed for the job and was lucky enough to get offered the job. I took the job without having read the script, which I never do. But this was a situation where I just knew that I wanted to work on whatever David O. Russell was doing because I think he's a brilliant filmmaker. And it was really funny because I didn't even think of the script until I spoke with an editor friend later who said, that's great. You get to, it's fantastic. You work with David O. Russell. Like, how's the script? And I said, you know what? I have no idea. I haven't even read it. But once I got hired on the movie, I did read it, and it was amazing. And it had all sorts of. First of all, it was clear that this movie was going to be an epic movie. Joy was going to be huge, and it had all of these wonderful elements that David has in his movies: great characters, amazing dialogue, great character arcs, and a great humanity. That's something I really admire about his movies is that he has this he's very, even when his characters are kind of crazy, even when they're grifters, he treats them very kindly, and you see that they're real people, and that's something I think is not always easy to do, and I think David does that brilliantly. And so there was a lot of that in the script, and there was a lot of time jumping in the script as well. So a lot of that stuff was already there. But the other thing I learned, and I learned this early on from two of his editors who his longtime editors who he works with, Jay Cassidy and Ellen Baumgarten, I learned that he really starts with a lot of detail and specific intention, but he shoots to give more options in the editing room. And his movies really are, made in the editing room. It's like the final editing always is kind of the final script rewrite. It always has been, but definitely more so here. And he has a great relationship with his film editors, and he really trusts them and relies on them and works very closely with them. So when I say options and footage, he isn't just a director who shoots a lot of cameras, a lot of footage. He's not a director who hoses it down and then puts it on the lap of the editors and expects them to make something out of it. He really shoots with very specific intentions. But again, he'll leave the door open for different storytelling turns, or different creative moments. So, for example, he'll shoot scenes, and this is by by design. He'll shoot scenes where two main characters are talking, and there'll be a third character in there who will be participating in the scene. And then he may shoot the same scene, without that third character there, and a lot of that has to do with story calibration. He does that so that you will, as an editor, you'll have more options later on in terms of playing certain emotional notes. Okay, well, at this point in the movie, do I want to have this character? We might not. Oh, great! Luckily, he shot it both ways, so now we can do it this other way. And what's so smart about that is to someone that might seem like that's sort of undecided or misguided, but in the case of David, it's not. Has such a knowledge of editing that he knows that editing is made up of pieces, first of all, and so he'll grab these brilliant little pieces. But he also knows that that when you write a script and it's performed by actors, and then it's committed to film, and then it gets to the editing room, he knows that things get changed in the process. Not only does dialogue change, but sometimes emotion changes, and the scene on the page often does not, really resemble what you get in the dailies. And so he knows that, and knows that that means down the road you're very likely going to need more options to sort of calibrate. And so he'll shoot stuff that way, and it's definitely, his movies are editor heavy, and what I mean by that is that so much creative work is done with David and his editors during the editing process. So it really is like, he treats his editors as kind of definitely as collaborators, but as writers. And that was one of the most wonderful things about the experience working with David, is that you'd be working, you'd be editing, working on some scenes, and either he would come in to work with you, or he might get you might get called into his office, and it would be one of his assistants would come in and knock on your door and said, David's asking if all the editors could come into his office, and all the editors would come in. It would be, in the case of Joy, I was working alongside 3 other editors, all amazing editors, Jay Casty, Alan Baumgarten, and Chris Tellison. And we'd all go in, and we'd all, David would pitch ideas for scenes, and he would want the editors to pitch ideas back. And after we'd have meetings like that, we'd go back to our editing rooms armed with notes and editing plans. And then he'd start making the rounds. He would come to work with me on certain scenes. We'd work on things together, worked very closely. He has a photographic memory. His photographic memory of what he shot. He really is very decisive, and he's just he's always kind of firing on all cylinders. So he'd come work with me, and then we'd work together. He'd give me notes, and then he would move to the next editor and do the same thing, and repeat. And there's so many things to try that I think that's part of why he likes to work with multiple editors. Because his movies are very they're in large part they're made in the editing room.
That's interesting. Is each editor working on a different scene or sequence simultaneously, or is everybody working on the same scene?
No, you're all working on separate scenes, and so during dailies, when I was on while they were shooting, I was on with Jay, and he and I would just pick scenes as they came in, and okay, well, this scene got shot, so why don't you take this, or I'll take this. And then, oh, well, here's another scene that came in, and this connects with this other scene you cut. Why don't you take that so you'll have a good long run of several scenes to cut? But once shooting wrapped, and we were joined by Alan Baumgarten, David broke up the movie into sections, which is kind of how you work on movies anyways. You really break the movie up into separate reels, and it's really the most manageable way to work. So you're not always editing little scenes within a huge 2-hour thing. So you always kind of work that way. So David broke the movie up into sections the way he saw the movie. And then he said, okay, well, who wants to take this? Okay, well, Tom's already cut some stuff in section 1. Why don't you do this? And he's already been working on a lot of section 4. So why don't you take section 4? And he broke up the movie that way. And then when Chris Tellison, the 4th editor, was brought on board, they gave him other sections to cut. And so we always worked separately on things, on our own things, and he would give us notes on our specific scenes, our specific sections. Often he would call all the editors in to look at another editor's work, and we would all comment, and we would all talk about what we had just seen, and then that editor would go back and do notes on his own stuff. And eventually, things would move around. Things would sort of shift. So we would hand scenes off to each other. So, stuff that Jay Cassidy cut initially, David might say, okay, well, Jay's working on this other thing, but I want to do a polish pass, or I want to try some things on this section. So Tom, why don't we work on this together? And, and the biggest thing about working with other editors is that, you really have to be truly collaborative for that to work. It's not about the ego, and it's never about, who cut what scene. You always try to be respectful, you always try to retain someone's work, but at the end of the day, it's not about what editor cut what scene. It's really about, trying to make the best story, the best movie possible. And David's the first one to say, if anyone has a great idea, I'll take it. Let's do it. I don't care. It doesn't have to be my idea. I'm happy to do whatever's best for the movie. And he really means that. So I found him to be extremely collaborative and very, very respectful of the editing process. He loves his editors, and that's what makes it an amazing experience to work on.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to see Joy on Friday night, and I really loved it.
Wow. You've seen it. You've seen the finished product before me.
Really? You haven't seen the film yet?
No, because I've gone to screenings of it, but I have not seen the version that you saw, because I was on the picture for about 7 months. I had to leave earlier than I would have liked, because Damien Chazelle's film La La Land pushed earlier in its schedule, and they ended up shooting earlier than we originally thought they were going to shoot. So I actually had to, and I was already kind of obligated to do Damien's, obligated makes it sound like I didn't want to do it. It's actually I'm lucky to work on both pictures, but my schedule is already kind of locked in terms of doing Damien's movie. So I actually had to leave before the sound mix and before they finished picture cutting. So, so you know more than I do.
Yeah, in fact, because it was on the Fox lot, they had a Q&A, and Jay Cassidy was there, and I'm blanking on the other editor's name.
Alan Baumgartner.
Yeah, Alan Baumgartner as well.
Yeah, Those guys are just amazing film editors, and I always admired their work. And now that I've worked, on one of David's movies, I see the amount of work it takes and the skill it takes to put these things together, I really, you know, I can't commend them enough. You know, I mean, their work on American Hustle is, yeah, I always love the movie, but, you know, afterwards getting to know them and getting to know David, I was like, wow, this you know, this is, you know, it became clear the amount of work that was done in the editing room, you know, and that's like, you know, that's very, very inspiring. You know, when I first met Jay and Alan, when I got the job on Joy, I went over to Alan's editing room. I think he was working on Trumbo at the time, and Jay brought with him on his laptop a scene that they had cut from American Hustle, and it was one of the opening scenes with Christian Bale, Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Shea Whigham, and Bradley Cooper, and the scene took place in a hotel, and you know, it was basically the scene kind of finished with someone sliding a briefcase of money over to toward Shea Whigham and Jeremy Renner, and them rejecting it because they could smell that it was a bribe and something was weird. So they showed me the scene, and it was a scene that I didn't exactly remember, but was familiar, and it was a really well-cut scene, a beautiful scene with nuance and humor and all these great character details, and it was, you know, the scene was probably about, like, you know, 2 minutes long or something like that. And then Jay showed me the same scene from the finished film, and it was like, you know, I mean, the scene was like 15 seconds long or something. It was, you know, it was basically the beginning of the scene, and then there was, you know, a great sort of cut to, you know, the same insert shot of this briefcase being slid over. And the point he was making was that when you work on a movie with David, you know, stuff that is in the script and stuff that is there in your first cut may go through so many changes that, or it very likely will change and evolve so much that the finished product will almost not resemble what you had in the very beginning, you know. And so he was really showing that to illustrate a point, you know. And the first scene completely worked on its own, was a brilliant little scene. I didn't think there was a thing wrong with it, really, but it changed so much so that what you had at the end was exactly the right scene for the movie. And so, and that's, you know, that's the way that that's the way it worked on Joy, you know. And it's you know, David's not, even though he's a great writer, he's not precious about the script. He's the first one to throw stuff out if he feels like it will be better for the emotion and better for the story, you know. And not all filmmakers are writers and directors are capable of doing that. Damien Chazelle is also very good at doing that too. He has no problem jettisoning things, even great things, if it will help emotion, it will help a larger story.
Yeah, no, I think that's a benefit of a filmmaker, to really see it in perspective and realize that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I was curious, lastly, if there's a particular scene or sequence in Joy that you worked on that you feel the most proud of, that really went above and beyond your expectations.
You know, I'm proud of so many things that I worked on in the film. You know, it's hard to say because I know his movies change so much. They change and are shaped right up to the end. So, you know, at the risk of mentioning, you know, the brilliant scene that I cut that isn't even in the finished film, which you will know better. You can tell me right away because you've actually seen the final film, and the version I saw was just shy of the final. But you know, I worked on. I remember hard to say. It's many scenes. I worked on Mimi's funeral scene. I remember doing some work on that, which was very, very. I paused. It's such a. It's a short scene, but it's such an emotional scene, or at least it was at the time in the story. I remember doing some work on the scene after the funeral, where Jennifer Lawrence is having a very serious sit-down meeting with her sister, played by Elizabeth Rome, and with her father, Rudy, played by Robert De Niro. They're all wearing black. They're all in mourning. I just remember the performances in that were just stellar. I mean, Jennifer was so steely and really reminded me of Al Pacino in Godfather Part 2, you know. And I think what really gives that, you know, that sort of stuff, the character that she becomes, I think what really gives that value is that you have the arc and the breadth of her whole life. I mean, you see where she comes from. You see her as a little girl, and you see that she's a very different character. And that's something I think was really important to David, is to show this you know, to show this huge, epic life experience that this character had. So I loved working on scenes that you know, hit those milestones in Joy's life. I remember working on great stuff with early on with Rudy, and coming back home to Terry, and you know, them getting back to their old tricks and getting into arguments, and you know, he says that she's like a gas leak, and all this amazing dialogue by David. You know, it's just some hilarious stuff. But so I say, you know, I worked on these scenes, but also, you know, again, this process of, you know, working with David is not one where, you know, it's not one where you pick out a scene and say, this is, you know, this is my scene, or this is the scene that I did. I worked on those scenes. I worked on stuff at the end. I worked on so many different scenes, and all the editors did as well. So, you know, it's something that I look at and think of more collectively as our film, you know. You know, the film was touched by so many different, you know, all the editors worked on everything at one point or another in some sort of form, you know. So in a way, you know, my hope for the movie is that it feels, you know, less like this, you know, a bunch of scenes cut by individual people, and more of this, you know, more as a whole, and more as this, you know, kind of uniform experience, you know. So the hope is that, you know, and I don't think it was going in this direction either, but I think in any situation where you're working with multiple editors, I think you want it to feel like it's coming from one source, you know. I don't think you want to feel like you're cutting a movie where, or you're watching a movie where it has a certain type of style in one section of the movie and then a different style in another section. I think that's something where you really want all the editors to kind of be invisible in a way. And I think, you know, when you see some of the best classic movies that were cut by multiple people, I think that's when it works best. So if you look at, you know, Godfather 1 or 2 or something like that, where several people worked on these things, I think or Apocalypse Now, or even Silver Linings Playbook, or, you know, American Hustle, I think it feels like it's coming from one voice, you know, and that voice should feel like, you know, David O. Russell. It should feel like it's like coming, you know, the emotions should feel like they're coming from these characters. So, you know, you'll have to tell me, because you've you've seen the finished film, but you know, I'm proud of every little thing that I, you know, participated in on that movie.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's a wonderful film. It's probably my favorite of David's. I must say.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I just think I think he changes. You know, he's sort of developed a certain style, and I think it even evolves more in this film in a way. I think it even steps up a notch. It's really beautiful. I definitely recommend it.
That's great. Well, I will. You know, I will be seeing it very shortly, and I resist. I'll probably get a screener for it. I resist seeing screeners, especially of that movie. I like to see it on the big screen.
Oh yeah, with the music and with the sound.
Yeah, I mean, David is such a he uses music in all his movies. He uses it so brilliantly, and everything. And certainly Joy is no exception. And the other thing too is the thing I always love about his movies is that you know, they really defy genre. You know, what do you call it? Is it a comedy? Is it a drama? Is it a dramedy? I mean, where do you put his movies? You know, and that's. But at the same time, they don't feel like they're you know, adrift at sea. They always feel very confident, and they kind of own their style. You know, but where do you put a movie like Three Kings? I mean, Three Kings has a funny scene with, you know, with Mark Wahlberg, you know, telling Spike Jonze to like pull a document out of a guy's ass, you know. But in the same movie, you have a girl who sees, you know, her mother executed, you know, and it's a comedy, is it a war film, is it both? I mean, I guess it's all those things, but you know, it's a strange kaleidoscope, it's a collage, but you know, but it does it tells its story and plays these emotions so well that you leave it feeling like you've had a certain type of emotional experience, and in a way, it doesn't matter what genre it was, you know. And I think Silver Linings Playbook and American Hustle, you know, have some of that same thing. You know, have some of that same genre ambiguity. You know, not on purpose, but I think it's because, you know, David doesn't want to be restricted to certain tropes and genres. He's always trying to do something new and unexpected. And that's the thing about Joy is he always said that he wanted to do something different. You know, he admitted this was out of his, you know, not the usual film that he would do. He was trying new stuff, but it has the same key ingredients that all his films have, which is a sort, in my eyes, a sort of humanity. You know, they're emotional, they're intense, there's humor in them, but you know, there's a liveliness to them that I think feels very, you know, organic and real, you know, and that's something that I've always been attracted to about his movies. And Joy was no different in that way.
Yeah, no, I love the film, and I think that's what I've always responded to with David's style is that not only is there he doesn't sort of pigeonhole himself into a genre, but there's such a looseness to the performances, and it feels more real and vivid than most films, which just sort of go into like kind of a melodrama moment. I don't know, there's something, the way he handles the actors, the performances are just, they're perfect. They're funny, they're sad, they're everything.
Yeah, no, agreed. And again, I think a lot of it is because he's you know, he's very kind to his characters. So, you know, if you have a character like Christian Bale or Amy Adams in American Hustle, you know, we see that these people might be grifters and they might be trying to make a buck, and they might be deceiving other characters in the movie, but you know, they're really good people at heart, you know, and even though they kind of some of the characters can drive you crazy and do crazy things. At the end of the day, they're not just bad, annoying people. You know, they're basically like people we know. You know, you see what makes them tick. You know, and I think that's something that David's movies do really well, and that's something that I definitely saw in in the Dailies of Joy. You know, there was definitely an earnestness there that I thought was very sweet and very moving. And on top of that, you know, David wanted to add kind of something magical. You know, I mean, there's something always magical in his movies, like Silver Linings Playbook and American Hustle. You know, there's something romantic. You know, like when you see Amy Adams and Christian Bale, like in The Dry Cleaners, and they're having an intimate moment. You know, in the middle of all these, you know, coats and the dry cleaners, you know, like sort of rotating around them, around their heads. I mean, there's something very sweet and unusual and magical about that. And I think that's, you know, I think Joy was no different. I think he really wanted to, you know, how did he put it? He really wanted to find or see the extraordinary in the ordinary, you know, and that was something I hadn't heard him really say before. You know, when I knew about his other movies, he said it for this movie, but I think it applies to all his movies. You know, and I think that's what makes them really kind of lively and special. And you know, it's you come out of his movies feeling like you've seen a story about real people. You know.
Yeah, well, I have a great appreciation for your work on Whiplash as well as on Joy, so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk today.
Thanks so much, Jeffrey. I really appreciate it, and so happy that you really liked Whiplash, and really happy you like Joy. I'm very excited to see it, and it's just I'm happy you love both.
Yeah.
So.
I'm looking forward to La La Land.
Yeah, me too. It's coming along great, and it's going to be a very different movie than Whiplash. You know, hopefully La La Land will have its own kind of magical quality to it. I think it does, and I think there's a lot of stuff in it that fans of Whiplash will love, and I think it also expands upon that, and you're going to see some stuff that you really probably wouldn't expect from the director of Whiplash. Because it has some qualities from Damien's first movie, Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench, which was a kind of a brilliant little movie, 16 millimeter black and white cinema verite musical. So if you ever get a chance to see that film, it's available, you know, on DVD. It's a great little movie.
Yeah, I've seen little scenes of that on YouTube, and it has a great like romantic tone to it, which I like a lot.
It's really great, and La La Land has some of that quality, and then so much more. It's a much larger movie. I mean, a much larger movie than Whiplash. Whiplash was this real kind of two-handed, intimate, visceral story, really driven by a certain amount of angst from one of its characters. This movie is more of an experience. You know, it's set against the backdrop of Los Angeles. It's a love letter to Hollywood, to LA, but at its core, it's really kind of a love story between these two characters, played by Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, and it's just beautiful and big, and hopefully people will feel that when they finally see it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Damien's one of the great new filmmakers out there. So
he's fantastic. I'll tell him that you said that. It'll make his day.